Dead Island Riptide kicks off where the 2011 original left off. It brings players a brand new island to explore, new weapon mods to create, new enemy types to fight, and a brand new playable character to master. The return of this first-person horror survival game once again cements the idea that the Dead Island franchise is, in the opinion of many, definitive of the genre. Presented as a first-person brawler, Dead Island Riptide allows the player to control one of the 4 survivors featured in the previous game, as well as presenting them with a new choice in the form of John. The 4 original characters all have the same weapon specialities as before. Logan is good at throwing weapons, Perna is the firearms expert, Jian is all about blades, and Sam B does the heavy hitting. John fills in a gap that existed before, adding a hand-to-hand expert to the mix. His solid punches, martial arts techniques, and fist weapon specialities allow the player to get really up close and personal with the zombie hordes infesting the Paradise Island. Those who have played the previous title can import their saved characters into Riptide. The difficulty curve is pretty steep in this case, as the game once again scales challenge according to character level. Starting a new character will grant the player with skill points to divide up between the character's 3 skill trees, up to around level 14. Alternatively, the player can choose from preset skill point allocations. Riptide picks up the story where it left off at the end of the original Dead Island. The 4 survivors manage to escape Benoi on a military chopper and make it out to a naval vessel just off the coast. But their luck doesn't last, and they soon find themselves stranded on a new island, Palanai. After a heavy storm, much of the island is flooded, adding a new dimension to the game dynamic, including the use of boats as vehicles, and zombies that ambush the player from the water. With a new island to explore, a new playable character, several new zombie enemy types, and new weapons to create, Dead Island Riptide appears to offer both fans and newcomers an improved zombie popping game. The real question is whether they managed to address the issues that plagued the original title. The answer, to be blunt, is no. It seems that Techland were content to deliver more of the same. Many of the issues from the original title crop up in this second Dead Island release, but the essence of Dead Island lives on in Riptide. The overall result is an addictive and long game that fans will enjoy, despite its problems.
Anybody else want some of this?
Graphically, Riptide initially looks rather good. The island of Palanai is well realized, with bright, vibrant colors mixing in with muddier shades to show the depression and decay. However, chinks in Riptide's looks show up sooner rather than later. At times, the lighting feels a little off, particularly during character-driven cutscenes and mission briefings. Textures are sometimes a little too simple, and the game will give the player visual problems that include pop-up, screen tears, and sometimes exaggerated clipping. Character models will also, from time to time, appear from nowhere when the player enters new areas. Additionally, many of the enemy character models are repeated over and over again. With the number of zombies the player will plow through during the course of the game, this repetition becomes rather obvious. Every now and then, though, the player is treated to a visual feast, with a breathtaking vista or great lighting effect popping out seemingly from nowhere. These moments might not mitigate visual problems, but they do tend to make Riptide's sins a little more forgivable. Speaking of effects, Riptide once again offers a mixed bag. Most effects have to do with the buckets of blood that the title liberally splatters about when the player is slaying zombies. The occasional slow-mo image when the player gets a lucky crit punctuates the often chaotic combat. There are explosions, flames, electrical and water effects, and many others, which are generally rather decent. The voice acting is hammed up for the most part, with sometimes laughable dialogue full of foul language and odd accents. It doesn't mar the experience really, except when the wrong voice comes out of the character's mouth. This is a rarity and is more annoying than ruinous, but it really is something that shouldn't happen. Generally, the sound effects are good, although the zombie noises do get overused a bit. A little more variety in that department would not have gone amiss. And on very rare occasions, the game doesn't seem to know when to shut up. Sound effects sometimes carry on in loops when they should have stopped.
You like that?
One of the biggest criticisms that the original game got was that playing a brawler in a first-person perspective isn't ideal. Enemies can easily slip out of the player's limited field of view, only to strike from the side or behind. That issue, unfortunately, is still here, as are controls that are occasionally just a little sluggish. Firearms, which come up a little later in the game, don't fall prey to the same issues, but zombies can still strike from every angle. That said, the actual playing of the game can be immense amounts of fun. Riptide will generously throw level ups at the player, and provide more than enough enemies to beat to a pulp. It takes a bit of getting used to, although veterans of the franchise shouldn't have any problems. Like the visuals and sound department, there are many little bugs that creep into the game dynamic. Sometimes a character will hook up on some geometry, or an activation's hotspot simply won't work. It's frustrating at the best of times, but thankfully it isn't something that comes up too often. The AI is as relentless as ever, often overpowering the player with a barrage of undead. There seem to be a few pathfinding issues, with enemies getting stuck behind objects or settling into movement loops on occasion. That said, zombies aren't supposed to be too smart, so drawing them into traps thanks to their low intelligence is extremely satisfying. One addition to the dynamic is the defensive structures that the player uses as a base. The player or players will have a limited time to fortify an area before having to take on waves of attacking undead. The idea would have been better if it didn't come up quite as often as it does. These battles are really intense and very exciting, but the repetition of this doesn't do the title too many favors. In terms of plot, Riptide leaves a bit to be desired. It's quite predictable and doesn't hold any real surprises. But this game isn't so much about plot as it is about finding inventive ways to kill the risen dead, and it supplies players with tons of inventive weapon modifications to do just that. With a number of side quests, many of which are the fetch and carry variety, there is plenty for the player to do. Even just venturing out for supplies to try and build a sweet weapon can keep the player busy for hours.
Come on, you ugly bugger!
The new zombie breeds, including wrestlers, screamers, drowners and grenadiers, all of which sound rather interesting, help freshen the mix, presenting challenges that the player hasn't faced before. Their introduction into the game is well paced, with new zombie types rolling out over most of the game's long playtime. Ultimately, players will want to enter multiplayer sessions for Riptide. They were the best way to play the original, and the same counts here. Techland managed to trim up a number of the multiplayer aspects rather nicely, including an excellent system for basing challenge levels on individual player levels, rather than using a sweeping system for determining difficulty. While single player is a lot of fun, the game really is designed to take advantage of its 4-player limit, either online or via system link. In closing, it feels that Riptide could have benefited from a lot more tinkering under the hood. Recurring issues really shouldn't happen at all, particularly not in a sequel, and Techland should have spent more time on fixing what was wrong with the original, rather than trying to cram more content into a leaky bucket. That said, Riptide isn't broken. Despite its bugs and oddities, it can be immense amounts of fun to play. Fans of the original will certainly enjoy themselves in these new adventures, as Riptide does have a few redeeming qualities that shine through from time to time. If you're willing to put up with some frustration and be a little forgiving, this game can be a fun and exciting experience.